Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Office Hours. This is episode number 52, Big 5-2. That means we have one episode of Office Hours for every week in the year. Whatever week you're listening to this on, welcome and hello. Office Hours is a call-in show where you, forward-thinking humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, tieflings, dragonborn, and other that you are, have gone to my website at www.adam-koble.com. You've clicked on that little Office Hours link, little guy up at the top. You click that, and you filled out the form, and you recorded your voice, and you submitted your question, and then I read it off of my list of questions, and now I'm going to answer it for you. Well, maybe not you particularly, but, well, Sly Bebop, it's your lucky day, because I'm going to answer your question. And let's begin there.
Hi Adam, Sly here. Could you give some advice on how to aggressively frame scene between characters, in the same way you framed Gritch and Smith July in your Damp Apocalypse for World 30 Presents? I'd like to hear if you've got any further insight in how to bring together, almost adversarially, two or more characters to create dynamic situations and still emphasize players' agency and or choice. Many thanks.
Sly Bebop, I could listen to you say the word Gritch all day long. So, I was thinking about just jumping into this question and, explaining the answer that Sly Bebop is looking for. But then I realized it might be worth listening to the scene that Sly Bebop is talking about. So, I've got a little blast from the past for you. Here's me framing a scene from episode 1.4 of the very first Roll20 Presents Apocalypse World game. Check it out. This is what Sly Bebop is talking about.
We'll just start in the middle of things. So, Gritch, you're currently being held by your throat about an inch off the ground. Your back is up against the slimy outdoor surface of what maybe used to be like a balcony or something. Half of it is submerged. It's coming out of a building and sort of dipping in, and there's algae collecting all around it. And this is distinctly, you were out here, out of the way, being held against the wall by Mercer, and she's got her knife out, and she's
and I'm alone.
She's shouting at you about something. You're not alone. Smith's there too, but not doing anything about this. We'll get to this in a second. You see a tortoise. He's on his back in the desert. Why are you helping?
Why aren't you helping them? What's a tortoise?
Rich, what did you do? What did you do to piss Mercer off so much that she had to drag you out here and shove you up against the wall?
So I love that folks folks in chat, folks who are watching this live, immediately recognized John Harper's little chuckle, John's evil chuckle in there. So yeah, that's me framing. That's the very first scene of the whole campaign. That's the very beginning of our game. And as Sly Bebop pointed out in their question, a lot of what I was doing there comes directly from Apocalypse World itself, right? This is the game's rules in action that give me, as a GM, or an MC in that case, specific permission to do shit like that. This is all part of the first session stuff in Apocalypse World, right? Vincent demands of us that we ask questions all the time in the first session, right? Anything that you might be interested in later, ask. Anything a player says that sticks out, anything that seems like the tip of an iceberg, or like fish moving underwater, ask. So what I was doing there was basically looking at some things that I thought might be interesting about the relationship we had talked a little bit about for Gritch and for Smith July, and framing a scene that would allow me to ask more questions about that. You can see I'm asking that very important question right at the end before I turn the scene over to Austin and Andrew. I ask, what did you do to put yourself in this position? And another thing that I'm doing from the first session suggestions there is looking for where they're not in control and pushing there, right? So Gritch had been portrayed during character creation as someone of value, and like every other brainer in every other Apocalypse World game, the brainer is an important thing to have in your toolbox, but is not the most resilient of tools, right? Every brainer is a tool, but mostly they're like jeweler's tools. They're delicate. So I was going to ask here, someone is taking advantage of your delicateness, dear brainer. What is your deal? Who is going to help you? Why did you screw up? And to posit that question to their relationship, why is it that you're not in control of Smith July? Why isn't Smith July helping you, right? Pushing on a position of tension that I noticed during character creation. And then giving every character good screen time with other characters. I wanted to frame a scene with both of them in it. We're doing that little PC, NPC, PC triangle. I wanted to learn about Smith July's relationship with Mercer. And then hell, have a fight. Right? That is explicitly a principle of the first session. Have a fight. It's the first session, but why not, right? Why not escalate right up to that physical violence, that intensity, that thing that we know to be meaningful when we jump into a game's narrative, right? So basically, most of the credit there goes to Apocalypse World. Now, I won't say I had nothing to do with it. Obviously, my choice to frame as aggressively as I did was coming from a place of experience and decision on my part, but more or less, I'm just doing what the game told me. Which, don't take that to undermine the fact that Apocalypse World is an incredibly well-designed game that can and will improve your game mastering generally if you just play by the book and listen to the rules of the game, right? Apocalypse World, it's not that all of these people, like, John Harper, like myself, like basically everyone else who has played the game, why we evangelize Apocalypse World so much, it's because it's very well designed. And if you play it the way it's written, it's going to give you good narratives. But I think the real thing here, and this will ultimately be my real answer, but what allowed us to play Apocalypse World in the first place and to play it with the brakes off is that playing with people over time develops trust. And trust allows you to create more meaningful narratives where risk is a necessity. So let me unpack that a little bit. So what made that scene framing possible, and what allowed me to do what Apocalypse World asked for, just doing what Vincent knows through design and testing to set the stage for a good campaign, what made all that possible, and the reason that I started that way with Andrew particularly, is that Andrew and I have history. Right? Andrew and I have known each other for a very long time. At least the way that my social structures accrue, Andrew and I go way back. We've known each other over a decade now and have been playing games together that whole time. I think I've shared this story before, but the first time that Andrew and I ever met was at a Shadowrun game. We were playing 4th edition Shadowrun with some mutual friends. So, we've played Apocalypse World. We've played Burning Wheel. We play tested Mouse Guard way back in the day. We've been playing all these games over the last year and a bit on Roll20 Presents, but like a ton offline too, like prior to ever doing Roll20 stuff. Right? That Apocalypse World game was, I think, our first online game together. So in the same way, I think that we as people, as gamers, not just Andrew and I, but you too, the same way that we learn to play a game well, right? Learning the nuance and maneuverability of its rules, we learn the same things about other people. We learn how to play well with others, right? And this is something that I think is an absolute prize of good role-playing environs, right? Like your space. Now, it's tough because I think that this is the thing that we often strive for when we get really entrenched with a group, right? You have these groups of people who have all been playing, 2nd edition D&D together for 20 years, and that's admirable, but I think that as we play more and more with people, it's important to recognize that we play with them because we want to, right? Now, I've been in game groups that I've stayed in longer than I wanted to because I liked the game or I just didn't want to not have a campaign going, right? We suffer to continue to have these relationships that maybe aren't healthy for us because we're scared not to have them. And one thing that I think, and this is a bit of a digression, but one thing that I think is really great about being able to play in this sort of modern environment that with a relatively inexpensive webcam and a headset mic and Roll20 or just, I mean, honestly, just like Google Hangouts, you can play a role-playing game with a much wider pool of people. So you don't end up having to play with people that you don't like. But this is the flip side of that, right? This is Andrew and I realizing fairly early on that we like playing games together, that we have developed a rapport, and that we're able now to do things that require trust in play. So the better we know someone, the better we understand them, the more we can open ourselves up to situations in which we're required to share trust in them. And I think that trust is a huge part of, and this is such a truism, but trust is a huge part of any relationship, doubly so a huge part of any creative endeavor, right? Both the ability to receive someone else's trust in good faith and to give them trust as well, right? To trust them to do what's good. So as a game master, which I suppose is why you're here, right? As a game master, we have to learn to trust our players to take what we give them and roll with it, to contribute to our vision, and to support and expand on the things that we put in front of them. So when I say to Andrew, you are being held up by your throat by Mercer, notice that Andrew's response was forward-thinking, not retributive, not corrective, right? Andrew's first thought was, okay, what can I do with this next? Not, how can I prevent you from doing this to me? It was a foregone conclusion. They had bought in. And that's about trust, because as a player, right, they trusted me to treat their character, which is to say a collection of their ideas and contributions, with respect, to amplify the cool stuff that they put out there during character creation and give them an opportunity to build on it and to help them to contribute to building on it. So when I'm playing a scene where I'm going to aggressively frame something that might traditionally feel frustrating to a player, because let's be real, opening a campaign at the seeming mercy of an NPC who's already pissed off at you and has some power to throw around might feel like a bit of a fuck you in some games or with some people, right? If you don't know and trust your game master, you're going to have a really hard time starting a game where they're like, cool, your sword is broken, you have 12 arrows sticking out of your chest, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and what are you going to do, right? Before I frame a scene like that might feel frustrating to a player, I have to remember my knowledge of that player and their style and our relationship in mind, right? This campaign, the Damp Apocalypse, the Dampocalypse was the first campaign I'd ever run for Austin and for Avison. Right, for Stephanie. And I would not have started their gameplay quite so aggressively because I don't know them as players. I mean, I do now. I understand them better. But I knew that Andrew would be amenable to being slammed up against the side of a boat by an angry NPC. I know that about Andrew. This stuff is all social level stuff, right? This is too nuanced maybe, or too particular to an individual group or group of people at the table to be included as guidance in a game. I almost kind of hate when games tell us social level stuff. I guess what I mean to say is, like, note that Vincent doesn't say in Apocalypse World, start the game with a gun in their face. Because that shit won't always fly with every player GM dynamic, and Vincent knows it. Vincent knows not to give that advice or suggest that as part of this game. Now, I'm really glad that you asked about this, because I think player GM and player dynamics, those relationships, they don't get audience time in a way that character ones do. Right? I'm speaking particularly now of playing in a Twitch environment, or honestly, like any audience related environment. I think that we take risks as players that might not have the full, obvious, visible support work in the spotlight that the character stuff would for our audience. So there's a reason that, for example, I feel comfortable now playing this intense, kind of sexually charged courtly intrigue game with my Roll20 group, because that kind of game could lead very much to some intense personal PvP type stuff. And I know that we needed to take time as a group to bond and get to know each other before that kind of game was possible. The other thing that can really factor into making it possible to be aggressive about setting scenes like that one is control and power dynamic, and it's especially true when you're bringing in more than one player into that scene, right? You asked about how you can sort of pit these characters against each other and give them space to fight it out. So in Apocalypse World, the player moves interact with each other fairly clearly, right? In a Powered by the Apocalypse World game, the decently written ones at least, it's laid out that the whole table has a say whether you're triggering a move or not. But the move's parameters are either clear in the move that's being rolled, or in the GM's moves and principles and agenda. There's a feeling. Now, I think you've probably felt this, right, at the table. If you've ever been a player in a PvP situation, there's a feeling that we get when PvP comes into play sometimes. An added level of tension and frustration that I think might come from a similar place emotionally as like fighting with a sibling and having a parent decide which of us to punish. Right? There's this frustrated, I want to get my way feeling that we have in games sometimes. And in the storytelling experience of role-playing, it can be really hard to navigate. The rules of the game are there to help us when we're not, as a group, certain who gets their way and who's punished. The rules in the GM are there to referee. And I think that the players in question, if you're trying to set up this scene, need to feel a sense that whatever happens, they and their potential outcomes will be treated fairly, whether this is a PvP situation or just, being framed in a vulnerable position. You have to recognize that you're being treated fairly by the GM, by the other players. And I think the absolute best foundation for a good adversarial space, above and beyond just trusting your other players, is, and this is going to seem weird, a nice healthy dose of just not giving a fuck. Now, I don't mean don't get invested in the story or the game or your character. I mean, don't give a fuck about specific outcomes, right? I mean, be equally invested in whatever happens, not tied to like your specific vision as a player or GM, getting what you want for your character or your scene, right? Accepting the great uncaring nature of the universe and the absurdity of caring about any one particular outcome over another means that you have space for everything to be surprising and wonderful and interesting, right? Did you want to win the sword fight and save the princess? Are you having a little fit because you failed? Are you having a temper tantrum because you really wanted to win that fight? That's because you wanted one thing over another, that you prioritized a specific outcome, right? Instead, try to get excited about the idea that it might be really fun to get in a sword fight and have the princess stab you in the eye because she doesn't want you to save her, and live the rest of your life as a one-eyed exile, right? Don't invest in any specific outcome and treat your character like a wild horse, impossible to break, to whom you are nonetheless lashed to, and you'll have a much better time. Now, the caveat here is that you have to be playing a game that won't fuck you for this, right? D&D sucks if you lose, because losing is the wrong way to play Dungeons & Dragons. if you lose in Dungeons and Dragons, it is not interesting or fun. There is no failing forward. There is only you fucked up. Now, it might not be your fault. It might be the dice. It might be lots of reasons. But keep in mind that this particular game is not about fun no matter what happens. It's about winning. Now, this advice goes double, triple for the GM. When you set up a scene to be adversarial, intense, and threatening, like I did in Apocalypse World, you have to let go of the outcome, right? This is playing to find out what happens. Do not presuppose that just because your NPC is cool and tough, that the PCs won't beat them down to nothing. Don't assume that just because your encounter is well balanced, that the players won't either dismantle it or not engage with it at all out of fear, right? Be excited about whatever happens. Which brings us back to Apocalypse World in general, right? Framing a scene as a lit fuse means playing to find out what happens. Is the fuse going to burn down? Will it be stubbed? Is everything going to go up in flame? Once your players know and trust that you, the game master, are not angling for a given outcome, you're going to feel more comfortable participating in scenes where things like weakness and vulnerability are an advantage to the narrative, not something to escape or squirm their way out of. Right? Bring this up during your pregame. Tell your players that you watched the damn apocalypse and that there was this cool trick and you wanted to try being more aggressive about framing scenes and like take some stuff for granted that like their characters might end up in a bad way. And if they say, hey, that sounds like fun, let's try it, then you're good to go. And if they're not sure, you have to ask them to trust you. And then, by God, be worthy of that trust. Set up the bad chance, then give them an opportunity to show off how cool they are. Be a fan of the characters. Honestly, I would love to take an episode of any Apocalypse World game that I've run and kind of pop up video it, because I think that in a certain way, make a move but do not speak its name as a principle in Apocalypse World makes the GM's stuff all the more obfuscating to people watching it. Like if I really wanted to teach you how to play Apocalypse World, I would do a director's commentary and be like, bam, making a move but not speaking its name. Oh, future badness, right? Oh, separating them. And I would point that stuff out to the audience because I think that it can all fall by the wayside. It's really hard to see that stuff happening because the game is engineered not to have that happen. You're not supposed to see it. The GM is the wizard behind the curtain. Anyway, you want to be worthy of the trust that they want to give you. And don't frame these scenes to be an asshole or to get what you want or to see a player suffer. Characters suffering good, players suffering bad. Frame scenes to be a fan of the characters, to challenge them, to illustrate new and exciting things about the world around them. Keep playing your game. And making declarative statements about where a PC is at and what's going on without first letting them fuck up and get themselves into that situation requires your players know you're not trying to screw them, that that's not your job. And then later, and this is maybe the most important part, later when they do fuck up and they get themselves into a bad situation and it's their fault, you can really fuck them over and you can do it like you mean it. That's the best part.
Hi Adam, JP Orphatarius here. One of my players finds bond resolution in Dungeon World kind of unintuitive, and I admit I think he's got a point. How should a player know when to resolve an ambiguous bond like, this isn't my first adventure with blank, when to make new bonds, and what to choose to make them of? How can I support my players and prompt them in using bonds? Thanks much, and have a good one.
I like this question, because it's a question about award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World. I also like this question because bonds are system portable. Many of your favorite fantasy and not so fantasy role-playing games can benefit from straight up hijacking bonds out of Dungeon World and grafting them onto another game. So to put us all on the same page here, bonds are a mechanical element of Dungeon World that we designed to show the ways in which the characters are connected to one another. At character creation, they're filled in Mad Lib style, so we would know that Avon is soft, but that Hawk will make him hard, like her. Now, mechanically, the number of bonds you have on your character sheet are like slots, I guess. in that you have the same number throughout the game. Some character types are more social than others. But under Hawk's tutelage, Avon is not going to stay soft forever. So at the end of a session, if you've resolved a bond, you get to mark XP and rewrite that bond. So here's what Sage and I say in Dungeon World about that. A bond is resolved when it no longer describes how you relate to that person. This might be because circumstances have changed. Thalion used to have your back after he abandoned you to the goblins. Now you're not so sure. Or it could be because it's no longer a question. You've guided Wesley before and he owed you, but he paid that debt when he saved your life with a well-timed spell. Anytime you look at a bond and think that's not a big factor in how we relate anymore, that bond is a good place, the bond now is at a good place to resolve. You write a new bond whenever you resolve an old one. Your new bond might be with the same character, but it doesn't have to be. When you write a new bond, choose another character. Pick something relevant to the last session, maybe a place you traveled together, a treasure you discovered. Choose a thought or belief your character holds that ties the two together, and an action, something you're going to do about it. Bonds in Dungeon World are a straight-up rip-off hybrid of Hex from Apocalypse World and Burning Wheel beliefs. They're meant to be fluid from adventure to adventure, and they represent the kinds of things that not only start the party together, providing initial hooks and RP content for the players and the GM, but what keeps them together, highlighting shit that the players care about and that the characters think about each other to the group. So part of resolving a bond means explicitly asking the person whose character is bonded to yours about that resolution. So in a way, it's a place where someone else might have some say over your character sheet because they can suggest or influence your ideas about how your character advances. Hawk might be sick of Avon being a wimp and might say, hey, I think I'm done with seeing Avon as soft. You keep acting like a nerd, and I just don't think Hawk cares anymore. I was thinking maybe I could write a new bond like Avon, like all wizards, is a coward. After what happened with the bugbear, I won't let him get me killed, right? Now, this represents Hawk's player saying, look, I'm tired of babysitting you. I'm tired of trying to make you hard. I have failed, and it's your fault, Avon. I'm going to let you go. You're on your own now, wizard. Right? Now, Avon's player might say, oh, sure, that sounds great, if that fits with how they see the Avon-Hawk relationship, but they might also suggest alternatives. Other ideas for how things might go. Avon's player might say, maybe you just haven't seen my inner strength yet. Could you write something showing how Hawk thinks of me as weak, but doesn't understand me? Or maybe that you're running out of patience? Could we get like a soft change rather than a hard one? I'd really like to explore our relationship together. Ultimately, the bonds written the way they are after being resolved isn't as much important as the conversation about it, right? It's going to help the players work out a bunch of stuff with their characters and the way they interact, and each one should be resolved as a group. We should take the time and sit down and listen to Avon and Hawk talk about this, especially the GM. As far as the way you can help your players become better at writing bonds, how you can encourage them, I suggest asking questions anchored in the reality of your game. So when the players look at their bond like, this isn't my first adventure with Avon, you can ask them both how their characters feel about that. Do you still share the camaraderie of past danger and excitement? Or has it soured because of something that has happened? Right? All bonds that are written in play have to be grounded in the fiction of your world and the narrative you're exploring within that world. Ask for specific examples. Challenge blanket statements the players make. Look at their bonds with them and say, is this still true? What if, grill them a little, right? This is where you can lean into your skills as, if you have them, a Burning Wheel GM. Look at these as beliefs. Look at these as things that the characters think are true about the world, and you can nudge them. You can say, well, you think that Avon is soft, but what about that time he killed that peasant who found out that you were stealing the jewels from the castle? That was pretty hard. That was a pretty hard thing for him to do, right? The idea here is that bonds updating is mechanically incentivizing. You get XP if you resolve a bond. The rewriting of a bond then gives you two things, right? It gives you a new way to focus your interaction with another character, and it gives you a new thing to evolve and work through to get experience. Your players might be uncomfortable resolving bonds now, but if they want to get maximum amounts of XP out of every session, they're going to be pushing to resolve their bonds more and more as they play. And in the resolution of those bonds, they're going to be making moves, which makes the game interesting. That's where play is. That's good for all of us, right? It's designed to encourage characters with fast evolving relationships. So that's the key stuff when it comes down to bonds generally, whether you're using them in Dungeon World or outside. They create a pre-existing dynamic in the party. They have to incentivize changing relationships. So this is a caveat. If you're stealing bonds for another game, tie bonds in to the reward structure. Do not assume that people will play and resolve their bonds without some mechanical thing, right? If you are acting on a bond, I don't know, gain advantage on a roll, charge inspiration. If you resolve a bond, get a certain amount of experience points. Like, this stuff matters. It has to be incentivized. Flag what we think is interesting about each other's in-character behavior at the table. We write bonds about things we care about. And then encourage conversation between sessions about what's happening at the table. The idea here is that bonds encourage your players, with your help, to explore the relationships between them. You want to tell them about the purpose of that mechanism. Like, this is what bonds are about. Take this conversation to your table and tell them what I said, right? Maybe that'll help clarify. And then use that to springboard into a ton of questions, like you're already doing, because you're a good Dungeon World game master, right? So yeah, bonds they're a thing. They're a bit tricky. I feel like because a lot of people play one shots of award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World, we don't often see bonds change. So this is maybe one of those mechanisms that doesn't see a ton of screen time. So I hope that this has helped clarify them a little bit. I actually really like the changing of bonds, and I'm hoping that it's something that you can take to your table and find some more nuance in.
Hi, Adam. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Every night before the day office hours airs, I play D&D with a bunch of my friends from work. And last night, I convinced them to take a break from the story that I've been getting kind of bored with GMing. And now, one of them is going to start GMing a story, and I'm going to be a player. And I want to find a way to still foster good storytelling and play habits at the table while still being in a participatory role as opposed to as a GMing role. But I'm not sure if there's really anything that I should be doing extra to do this. Of course, I know more about the game 5e than anyone else at the table, so I'm still going to be in charge of rules questions a lot of the time, just incidentally. But I want to know if there's something less or more that I should be doing to help the game flow better that I couldn't do before as a GM.
So, I think a good player, whether in a PC or a GM role, exhibits a set of pretty standard conversational skills. Someone who is good at role-playing games learns the rules of the game, but is open to clarification of their understanding, given the contextual nature of games. A good player is better at listening than they are at speaking. A good player is able to respectfully disagree and know how to not get personal and intense when there's no need to. A good role player isn't attached to a specific outcome to the point where any other outcome ruins their fun. A good gamer reincorporates and invites ideas and input, but is firm about the things that the game says belongs to them. A good role player avoids being pedantic, because winning a rules argument is never actually that important, and using a pedantic rules argument to get what you want, it's always more harmful than good. A good role player cares about the narrative and the game, but cares about their fellow players more. A good role player knows how to walk the line between treating the game with reverence and irreverence as is appropriate for the game itself, for their table, and for the moment. All that shit remains true no matter what game you're playing or who you're playing it with or what role you're in. And I'm sure that there are lots more things that make someone a good role player that I've missed. But for me, those are the things that come to mind right off the top of my head. Now, of course, there are things that make a good GM and things that make a good PC when we're talking about skills and the roles that we play at the table. And I think that it can be very tricky moving from one to the other because there's power dynamics at play here. And power and hierarchy, perceived or real, makes things more complicated, even when that power structure is functionally illusory, right? Like we've talked about before, the game master is not the dominant person in the table relationship. A truly excellent game master is a servant, right? The game master is a butler, not a regent. But the impression in the culture and at most tables is the inverse. To use a phrase that I'm sure that I've used before, the GM has a tendency to bottom from the top. Look it up. Well, I mean, if you're like 12, don't. Please. But the transfer of power, which is what we're talking about here, right? Desounded is moving from a role of service, but perceived power, into a role of being served, but perceived lack of power, while someone else takes their place. And a transfer of power can be smooth, or it can be rough, depending on how you handle it. So as someone has been both a decent and goodly contributor to a game as a player, and also a completely ridiculous shit as a player, I can say that like any relationship, it's about understanding the people in the relationship. So the first thing that you can do is stop fucking asking me what you can do and go ask them. Seriously. I mean, don't stop. I appreciate your question, but like, I'm going to help you get some better ideas of what you can ask, how to have this conversation with your new bottom, your new game master. So seriously, ask your GM what you can do to help. Ask them if they want you to leave all the rules stuff to them, or they would prefer it if it would make them happy if you stepped in to help clarify. Ask them how much GM help they want, not how much they need. Because some players, like me, absolutely love it when a player does GM style stuff. I fucking like watch the Tales from the Loop one shot we did on roleplay. Jerry is all over me with GM interjections, and I loved every moment of it, right? Notice he asked permission. He said, hey, can I interrupt? I have a really good idea. I want to like pause it. What if this, right? He's good at that. You want players like that. You want to be a player like that. And the reason that Jerry felt comfortable doing those things is that he has experience as a GM. Now, not every GM is going to like that, right? I could just as easily have been like, hey, like, no, you have authority over your character, so focus on that. I'm not like that. I'm not about that life. I love that in that game. Rules are the same way. Personally, I love when my players are GM level knowledgeable about the rules, and I'm always ready to hear a correction, right? I blame a lot of experience, many hours of experience of having thousands of slightly delayed, occasionally wrong co-game masters surrounding the other side of a screen from me. But not every GM will like that or be comfortable with that. Some GMs want to fly on their own and expect you'll let them make rules adjustments in peace. So sit down with your game master and say, hey, so we're going through a bit of a power transfer here, right? You're going to become the game master. You are going to be in a position to serve us as players. And we as players are going to have an opportunity to be served by you as the game master. But I have some experience being in your position. You are relatively inexperienced. So I'd like to talk about how we can incorporate that experience stuff into play. Here are some topics you might want to cover when you sit down with your game master. Mechanical stuff, right? You brought this up. This is a common one. You know the rules of this game pretty well. You GM'd it. Ask your game master if they want your help with remembering rules, looking things up, clarifying rules as intended. You have contextual knowledge as yet untested to them and might have something to offer. Ask them if they want that. If they say no, zip your lip. Let them make mistakes. Let them sort out the rules on their own. This is going to be a thing that they are going to use to learn. You got an opportunity to do that. Give them that opportunity. If they invite you to help with mechanical stuff, awesome. Be the best. Be the Dave to this person, right? Be the Andrew. Know the rules and get good at suggesting how they work. You might want to ask your GM about narrative stuff, right? Is this a very traditional game of Dungeons and Dragons where the players are the players and the GM is the GM? Or would this GM appreciate if you jumped in to offer support, framing scenes, suggesting situations, playing NPCs for them? This can be really fun. Playing a sort of co-GM role when you're not in the scene, if the game and the GM support it, can be really great. But they have to trust you and not turn you into the backseat GM, right? You might want to cover handling the other players, right? Because the players, as they get used to their new game master, might look to you first to answer questions about the rules of the situation. Does your GM want you to answer or just turn them over to you? This is partly a habit, partly a regime change, and players can have some trouble with this. How many times in the early parts of Balance of Power did Strippin call me Steven? Right? Players who have a fundamental experience with playing with another game master might have a hard time adjusting to playing with another. So, ask your game master, if someone looks to me about a rule or to clarify something in the game, how do you want me to handle that? Because they might. Right? There are Wes March's episodes where people would ask me about rules things, and that's okay. Talk to your game master about setting stuff. Now, this might not apply if you're not sharing a campaign setting, but if you are, does your canon remain the same? And if so, how much input does this GM actually want you to have? Are you handing over a campaign to them, or are they starting a new thing? Are you allowed, if you are sharing that world, are you allowed to speak up and say, actually, the Royal Guard of Crystalia wears green cloaks in honor of the Verdant Prince, who was slain in 1200 in the War of a Thousand Salty Jerks? Right, so we wear the green cloak to remember. Oh, it's on purpose? Okay, sorry, right? Or should you keep your meddling former game master mouth shut the fuck up, right? Ask your game master about this. This may or may not be important to you in your campaign, but if it is, talk about it. And then lastly, what you really want to ask about, you want to give yourself some space to talk about, is general adversaria. So keep in mind that now you are not simply another player, right? As the former game master, your relationship to this game master is different from the other players. You have something special that they don't. The seat of power is still warm from your butt, and that's going to change your table dynamic, right? Being aggressive or adversarial, even jokingly, might not be welcome where another player's similar behavior might be. Check on this. I was allowed to be kind of a salty douchebag while playing Dr. Grigori and to call out game master horseshit because I've DM'd Dungeons and Dragons a lot, but also because I asked if it was okay. And this kind of ties back to that whole, like, you didn't see that. We didn't do that on screen, right? I wasn't just being a dick. I was being a dick with permission. The best thing you can do here, Desounded, is be graceful, right? Try to remember you're not the game master anymore. And sometimes too much help is worse than not enough. Invite your game master to rely on you when they want and need to. Don't be obtrusive with your help. Ask them what they need, not as a former game master, but as their friend and co-player with a set of experiences and practice that might be useful to them. And keep doing the things that make you a good person to have in the group. Try to shed the idea that you are the former game master and embrace your new job. It's not your job to mentor, shape, or foster this new game master. But if they ask for your help, be ready to give it to them in a way that gives them the space to learn and become their own type of game master. Because ultimately that's what you want. You don't want them to mimic you. You don't want to take up all their room. Don't breathe all the oxygen. Let them have space. And if they need you, they'll ask. Give them permission to do so. I hope that helps. You've got a game master in the making, and it's cool of you to think about how you can be the best possible player. It's very cool. So this has been episode 52 of Office Hours. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I hope it's been enlightening. You can get involved with Office Hours by going to www.adam-koble.com. Click that Office Hours link, fill out the form. We talked about this. You know what's up. You've been here before. And if you haven't, thanks for coming. Thank you for watching. And we will see you next week for episode 53 of Office Hours.